Hi, I'm Matt Harlow from DJ Case and Locavore.Guide. And today we've got a treat. Someone else is going to do the lecture, and that's Phil Singh, the president here at DJ Case. He's going to talk to you about evaluation. Take it away, Phil.
Hi, I'm Phil Sang with DJ Case and Associates. This segment, we're going to be talking about program evaluation. If you watched the first segment on objective setting, you remember that I said that setting objectives may be the most important part of planning any program. And if that's the case, then I would say that evaluation is certainly the most overlooked aspect of program planning. It seems like evaluation is the last thing people think to do, and it's the first thing that gets cut if budgets get tight. It can be difficult, it can be costly, depending on how sophisticated you want it to be. There's a gigantic continuum of things you can do to evaluate or assess programs, some of which are expensive, time-consuming, take a lot of resources, but it certainly doesn't have to be. When you think of just measuring or assessing outputs, number of people that attended, number of licenses sold, certain things can be fairly straightforward, fairly inexpensive. The key, I think, is to just do something to make sure that we're evaluating our programs. Our contention here at DJ Case is that this community, R3 community, conservation community, can no longer afford to just do stuff and hope. And that's what it's been for a long time, quite frankly. We've just done stuff thinking that doing anything is better than doing nothing, which you can certainly advocate for that. But we've just done some things. We've had a good idea, we've done a good idea, and then just hope that that makes a difference over time. And the problem, of course, if you don't do evaluation, you don't really know if it did or not. Maybe it was the perfect thing. Maybe it was a home run. Maybe it was exactly what you needed. Or maybe it was a total strikeout and really did no good other than to make people who are involved in it feel good. So we can no longer afford to do that. We need to really find out what's working and do more of that, find out what's not working and quit doing that. And evaluation, of course, is the key. So what's the purpose of evaluation? Why would we bother? Well, the first, of course, is to determine if a program is meeting its objectives. We want to have smart objectives. We want to have carefully thought about what we want our program to achieve. And then we want to measure if it's doing that or not. We want to refine our programs to better meet the objectives. So let's say we have smart objectives. We figure out metrics we want to rate against those objectives. And we find out that it is working, but it maybe needs improvement. Maybe we need mid-course corrections. So that's a primary purpose and value of evaluation is to better meet those objectives if you are, and then to stay on course over time, to deflect some of that potential mission creep that sometimes comes along. If you have good, well thought out objectives and someone comes down the hall with, hey, we should do this, we should change that, you can hold it up against the objectives that you've set and say, does that fit or not? So it's good insulation against mission creep. So when we think back about the SMART objectives that we used in the last segment, those just fake objectives that we made up but that didn't meet the criteria of SMART objectives, we want to take a look at those and think about metrics for each of those. So in that first fake objective that we built last time, creating 1,000 new license buyers by some unknown date, how would you measure that? Well, obviously, you're looking for an increase in license sales across a certain date range, something that if your state has electronic license systems, fairly easy to get this information. And then, of course, you'd want to stratify that by the new participants. If your objective was specifically new license buyers, then looking for people who had not previously shown up in the database, and then seeing how many of those purchased, and was it 1,000 or more. So that's an example of it's a sophisticated system, obviously, the data system, but fairly straightforward as a way to determine whether your objective was met. And that second objective that we talked about, retaining 75% of new license holders through a given date, that again would come back to your digital licensing system. Just be setting up a different query to find out whether you got that retention issue that you were wanting. So that could be done statewide, region-wide, at whatever level you want to set it up. But think about the fact that it could also be done just for your Locavore class participants. So you could track, I mean, certainly you could track it at whatever degree you wanted, but if you wanted to specifically see whether your Locavore program was making a difference, that's something you could track. You could just follow the particular people that went through your program or programs and see if they bought licenses again. And then registering 10% of licensed buyers as mentors, that mentor objective that we talked about. Pretty straightforward there too, comparing your list of people that went through your Locavore program to a list of people who signed up to be mentors later. Certainly you would want those folks, a good proportion of those folks to be on that list. So let's stop now and do an exercise to think about metrics. So remember those SMART objectives that you set from the last exercise. How do you know if they were successful? So I'd like you to write at least one evaluation metric or criterion that you can use for each of your SMART objectives, preferably more than one. Think about the full continuum of possible ways you can measure it. Some might be very easy. They may just be output based, how many people went through the program, that kind of thing. Others may require much more sophisticated techniques or have the ability to use much more sophisticated techniques to achieve them. Don't think yet about how possible they are. Just think about how could this be measured. Write at least one of those for each objective, and then we'll continue. Now we want to talk about types of evaluation. There's a handful of types. We're going to talk about three. One is pre-program assessments, things you would do before you delivered your Locavore program. Then, of course, there would be post-program or post-training types of evaluation. And finally, post-season evaluations, things you would do over time, the so-called linear evaluations. So we'll take each of these one at a time. Pre-program assessments, why would we do these? Well, mostly it's to establish a baseline that you can measure against. If you have SMART objectives, you want to measure against those. We need to know where your class, where your individuals were when they started, so you can detect whether they have moved from that spot based on what you delivered to them. Also, you can use them to refine your curriculum, to match your curriculum to your students, determining what they need so that you can deliver it better. So what kind of things can you ask in a pre-program assessment? Well, there's literally hundreds of things. Some simple ones might just be, what do you want out of the class? Super easy, super straightforward. What do they know already? What don't they know? Things they're sure that they know. Sometimes you don't know what you don't know. But if there are things that they do or are aware of that they want or don't want in the training or don't need in the training, that's a great thing to know ahead of time. Ways they like to learn. Are they really kinesthetic? They really want to get their hands on stuff? Are they more audio or visual learners? And what kind of barriers might they face? What's in their way of taking on this activity that you might be able to address? Lots of different methods for delivering it. Probably the most common is just individual interviews with prospective students before the class. Depending on the size and scope of your program, it might not be possible. There may just be too many, not enough resources to get that done beforehand, but you certainly would want to consider that, or maybe do a sample of them beforehand. This is a really good way of individualizing or customizing your material for your particular class member, so don't overlook it. Class discussions is another good way. This would be something you would do right at the beginning of the class, so everyone shows up, but you have them all together, and you might do some kind of assessment right before you begin. And then written surveys, really great for setting baselines if that's your particular objective, because it's quantitative. It's more quantitative. You can really detect, you can measure with numbers movement over time. So that's a really good one for baseline setting. So let's do an exercise on pre-program assessments. We have some in the sample material, so take a look at one or more of those. Cross out any questions, given your particular situation. There's certain things you're just not going to need, so cross those out right away. And then, of course, write down anything new. As you think about the material you're planning to deliver based on this sample program that you're building, what are the things you would really want to know in a pre-program assessment? So take a few minutes to do that, and then we'll continue. So following pre-program assessments, then of course there's the post-program or post-training evaluations. The reason for these would primarily is to measure changes in your students, your participants' skills and knowledge compared to what they came into your program with, gathering feedback on instructors or on materials is another important reason to do post-training evaluations. Similar methods, class discussion right at the end. So you've done your program, you could talk to them about it right there, a very qualitative method. You could do a written survey, an exit survey, if you will, right as they're leaving, or you could ask them to come after the program to an online survey. So you'd have a more quantitative assessment, but it wouldn't have to necessarily be done right then or take up a chunk of your training time to do it. But you want to make sure you get people to take these, if you're going to do it after the fact, make sure they take them as soon as possible after the fact, so you get it while it's still fresh in their minds. Some potential types of questions. I'm not going to go through these one by one. You can read the list. There's lots of different types and ways you can ask questions. These are just a few. But thinking about, especially if you plan to do pre and post and compare them, think hard about how they would measure, how they would detect, how you would detect based on their ratings, change in their understanding, attitudes between when they walk in the door and when they're walking out. So here's an example of some actual results from some of the Locavore program pilot testing that we did. So we had a list of items there, starting with ethical shot placement. We asked people coming into the program how much they knew about ethical shot placement, and then leaving the program, the same question, and they rated these on a 1 to 5 scale. So coming in, I had a 2. I rated my knowledge at 2, and leaving, I had a 4. So roughly a 2-point change. And so averaging those results across the whole class, here's our overall assessment of the course's impact on these items that you see on the screen. So we had, even the lowest one, these are ranked kind of in descending order. So even the lowest one, we had a full point change on a 5-point scale in their knowledge of this shooting skills topic. So good numbers here. I mean, showing that the program is effectively moving people, is giving them the knowledge that we suggested that they needed to have. Now you have to be a little careful as you interpret results like this, because just because a number here is low doesn't necessarily mean you did poorly in delivering the information. It could just reflect that people had a high degree of understanding coming in. So let's say this Locavore program was delivered to a group of competitive shooters. Well, they don't need much instruction on shooting, right? They could probably teach that portion of your Locavore course. But if they didn't know anything about hunting, that's why they're there. But that would suggest that you did just fine. In fact, if that was the case in this particular instance, you did great, even moving them 1 point. So you have to have some understanding, you'll get that as you deliver your course, some understanding of the people who are in the course and where their needs are. We have a similar example on the fishing side. Same situation here. We asked them about preparation and cooking of fish coming in, how much they knew about it, how much they knew going out. We saw nice increases here. If you have a full point, I mean even a half a point is decent. If you have a full point or more, you've done your participants a great service in delivering the information that you felt was important for them to know to become a Locavore. So let's do an exercise here on post-training evaluation. Similar as before, we want to review at least one of the sample post-training surveys in the materials. Cross out any questions you won't use. This should match up nicely with your pre-program that you did in the last exercise. And then most importantly, writing those new things. What are the things, given your specific situation, what are the things that you want to make sure you're assessing your program on in its ability to deliver? So take a few minutes and do that, and then we'll continue. The third type of evaluation we'd like to talk about is the post-season evaluation, the so-called longitudinal assessments or linear assessments. We'd like to determine if your students, first of all, purchase a license. After they left your course, did you convince them enough to go buy a license? Then, more importantly, finding out if they used it. Did they actually go hunting or fishing following your program? Like to measure their ability or success as a hunter or angler. Did they catch fish? Did they get game? Or even if they didn't, did they feel like they could? Did they feel like they had everything they needed to do that? And then assessing their participation in next step or support activities. We talk a lot about how one and dones don't get it done. The so-called one-day wonders, you have to provide multiple opportunities. And so are your folks, did you do that? Did you provide them opportunities, show them where to go to find those opportunities, and did they take advantage of those things? All really important questions to ask in your post-season evaluations. So what would you ask them? Well, obviously the likelihood of purchasing a license. If they already got one this year, how likely are they to do it next year? What's their likelihood of continuing beyond the current year? Do they see themselves as a hunter, fisher, locavore going forward? What kind of success did they have in the field this year? What do they anticipate for next year? Are there additional species now that they're interested in? So you convince them to get into this thing and they tried bluegill fishing, and now, boy, they really caught the bug. They want to try bass or trout or salmon or whatever, other species or other techniques. You got them into hunting, now they want to try it with a muzzleloader or whatever. And then potential next steps, things that they see themselves as doing, especially where that crosses over with where you and your agency or organization might be able to help them down that path. Some vehicles that we can use here, obviously interviews, one-on-one, phone interviews, Zoom interviews, super effective, super insightful, really important ways to find those nuggets that you're looking for. Email, a little bit less personal, but still individualized. So following up with them by email after the class can be really effective. Surveys become less personal, but quantitative, so you can aggregate and do numerical computations on the results. And online forums, oftentimes setting up chat rooms and such where your participants can get together among themselves with you looking on. You could be a moderator of it, or one of them could be, or you could just be looking on, just a lurker in the background to see what kind of things that the group is talking about. So let's do an exercise on post-season evaluations. And same drill as before. Review one of those samples or several to look at. Cross out the questions you won't use. Write down new questions that you will. Take a few minutes to do that, and we'll move on. Okay, congratulations. You made it through the evaluation segment. I encourage you to take whatever time you need to think carefully and critically about this step. As I mentioned at the top, it's oftentimes overlooked. People don't want to take their resources away from delivering the program into evaluation. It's a classic thing we hear all the time is evaluation. I don't have time or money for that. But as we've talked about, it can be fairly simple. It can be fairly unobtrusive. It can be fairly easy. It's not always, but it can be. And I would highly recommend that you do something in terms of evaluation for every aspect of your program. Make sure you have some kind of metric, some way of measuring all of your SMART objectives that you set for your program. That will go a long way into making your program successful over time. So thanks, and we hope to see you again in a future segment.